Hey everyone! Over the past couple of months, Samsung has released two headlining flagships. The Note 20 Ultra back in August and the Galaxy S21 Ultra a few weeks ago. But how do the two compare in terms of cameras? Sure, the Galaxy S21 Ultra was released more recently, so it's more expensive, but is that price tag justified? I'm Angie for GSM Arena, and this is our epic showdown between two Ultra smartphones. So let the camera comparison between the Galaxy S21 Ultra and the Note 20 Ultra begin. Now first, let's talk a little bit about camera hardware, as the Galaxy S21 Ultra has a new camera setup. It has a second generation Nanocell 108 megapixel main sensor versus the first Gen 1 on the Note. The key improvements are in Smart ISO Pro, which means that it should leverage its dual native ISO capability and produce better results in low light conditions. It also has a wider lens for the main camera. OIS is present on both phones, but sadly, neither has that dual aperture capability that we saw on the Note 10s and S10s of the past. The ultrawide on the S-series phone now has dual pixel autofocus, which is great, but otherwise it's the same camera as on the Note, with the same 120-degree field of view. Where the phones really differ is telephotos. The S21 Ultra has two telecams, one mid-range 3x zoom telephoto and one dual-fold periscope lens that gets 10x zoom. On the Note, you get a single 5x telecamera. On the bright side, all of the telephotos are stabilized. So, with that aside, how do these phones compare in terms of photo quality? During the day, both phones have excellent flagship-grade photos. While we expected the smallest amount of differences here, considering how similar the main cameras are, we did find some discrepancies. The S21 Ultra had more natural colors, while the Note's reds and greens were more in your face. Dynamic range and tonal development are pretty much the same, while the S21 Ultra has sharper shots, probably due to tweaked sharpening algorithms. The S21 phone also had more grain in the shots due to Samsung choosing to go a more natural route on the processing, while the Note has almost flawlessly clean images. It's not a lot of noise, but it is comparatively more noise. Now, zooming in is a different story, whether that means taking a snap of a pristine mountaintop or something less inspiring like a faraway parking sign because you're too lazy to cross the street. Let's start with 2x zoom, where both phones use a crop from their main snappers. It's mostly a toss-up in this comparison, and neither has particularly inspiring detail, which is disappointing because 2x zoom is useful in many scenarios. The S21 Ultra is noisier in the skies and has more sharpening, but other than that, there's not much of a disparity between the two. At 3x zoom, the battle rages between the S21's telecamera and the Note's main camera, though occasionally some software magic will include center detail from the Note's 5x telecamera. We haven't figured out when the stars align for the combo to work, but when it does, you'll get sharper results in the center than what the S21 Ultra can muster. That said, when only the main camera is triggered, the S21 Ultra beats out the Note in terms of detail. At 5x zoom, the Note has better detail and sharpness. It has better contrast and is noise-free too. At 10x zoom, the S21 makes a comeback, which is to be expected with its dedicated camera. It had the sharper images this time around, along with better contrast. The further in you zoom in, the more the S21 has the advantage, and at 20x zoom, you'll easily see more detail on the Ultra and fuzzier photos on the Note. The S21 Ultra goes all the way to 100x, while the Note doesn't even try, though at that point, images aren't even social media worthy. Now, if zooming out is more your thing, the S21 Ultra has a clear sharpness advantage during the day, though as before, the Note's photos are cleaner when it comes to noise. Dynamic range and color reproduction are more or less identical. Where the ultrawide camera of the S really beats out the Note is close-up shots. Thanks to the autofocus, the ultrawide camera of the S-series phone actually gets nearby subjects sharp, while the Note doesn't. Now, everything that we've said up until now applies for daylight scenarios. When the light gets low, things are a little different. When we compared shots from the main cameras, we actually gave the Note 20 the win. It has more detail, clarity, and retains textures better. It's noisier than the S21 Ultra for the first time in our shootout, and the S-series phone has less grain to show. Sadly, it also has less detail and less definition in fine textures than the Note. The two phones render colors differently too. The S has more neutral colors, while the Note processes warmer images. This is especially apparent with streetlights, and we preferred the S in this regard. Other than that, the two had similar exposure and dynamic range. If you switch on the night mode, the devices had pretty much identical levels of detail. Both have a heavily sharpened look and around the same level of texture. Dynamic range is similar too, and both have toned down highlights and shadows with a modest lift. However, in terms of white balance, there's even more of a difference here, and we definitely prefer the color reproduction of the cooler S phone. Once you start zooming in, you'll notice that the Note is sharper with more detail, while the S has more realistic colors. At 2x zoom, both produce usable images, though ones that aren't as detailed as no zoom at all. At 3x zoom at night, the Note once again does some composite action with the tele and main cameras, but the S produces significantly more detailed photos with better dynamic range. If you switch on the night mode at 3x zoom, it works more reliably on the S than the Note. Also, on the Note, there is less of a contrast with regular low-light photos, while night mode on the S21 Ultra improves shadows more noticeably. With 5x zoom at night, we didn't love the performance of either phone. The Note's shots are filled with noise, and the S21 is just a smidge better. The Note delivers slightly sharper shots in scenes with a bit of light, but it's not a dramatic difference. If you switch on the night mode, the shots become pretty much indistinguishable aside from the color processing. The very fact that you can shoot 10x zoom photos in the evenings at all is nice, considering up until recently, telephotos didn't even work at night. Now, both phones output photos with muddy textures and fine detail, but naturally, the S21 is superior when it comes to straight lines and more regular shapes. If there's just a bit more light, the S will have more dynamic range and reveal detail the Note can't even come close to, even if you use night mode, which does help a little. On the opposite side of the spectrum, with ultrawide shots in the evening and the regular photo mode, the Note beats out its sibling thanks to more detail in the shadows. The night mode is a huge boon to the S, where you'll see a lot more detail on the newer phone, while the Note gets much of its noise cleaned up. Once again, they're very similar aside from the orange cast on the Note. There's only one caveat that we'd mention, and that's the fact that the S phone has a bit of a crop on the ultrawide camera when you switch the night mode on, so it's a little less ultra-wide than we'd like. Both phones have faux bokeh modes, though you should know that the Note's is called Live Focus, while the S21 Ultra's is called Portrait Mode. They do the same thing though. You can shoot portraits with a regular or 2x magnification, but like we said before, 2x zoom shots don't have the most detail on these phones. A non-Ultra S21 would actually perform better in this regard. So when you decide to use these modes, you'll find that the Note has warmer skin tones with a faint pinkish tint to them, while the S21 is more realistic. The new phone also renders more detail, while the Note produces smoother and more flattering results. Both do an excellent job with subject detection and the default blur level. Portraits shot in the wider magnification are sharper with more detail, but everything else stays the same, which is to say, really good. In low light though, both phones struggled. Of the two, the Note managed to produce slightly sharper results. If you use subject detection with non-human subjects, the Note performs a little better, especially with our flower torture test. Now let's turn this entire thing around and take a look at the selfie cameras. The S21 Ultra has a 40 megapixel selfie camera, whereas the Note only has a 10 megapixel one. In any case, the new camera and the more realistic processing means that the S21 delivers selfies with a lot more detail and texture. And though that means you'll be seeing more wrinkles, we like the level of detail. The Note has smoother skin and less detail, and when it comes to scenes with backlighting, the S21 exposes your face a lot better. Portrait selfies were comparable and had a similar level of subject separation. While it wasn't as impressive as on the back cameras, it was passable. Low-light selfies aren't a strong area for Samsung in general, and we didn't love the results from either phone. Of the two, the Note delivered a sharper, though noisier photo. Things are better with night mode, and both have similar sharpness here.
Where Samsung often reigns supreme is video, especially in the Android world. So we were really curious to see how these two phones compare in this arena.
Both phones can shoot up to 8K at 24 FPS. The S21 has more noise, so we preferred the cleaner Note 20 Ultra, but other than that, we saw a similar amount of detail. While 8K is a spectacular marketing gimmick, it's not so useful yet, especially when you consider how much space it takes up. Drop the resolution to 4K, and you get a little more detail on the Note. Both have similar dynamic range, and even the colors are evenly matched. with the Note being a little bit more realistic. 4K with the ultrawides revealed more differences between the phones. The Note has slightly more greenish footage with flatter contrast, while the S21 had a more red tint and more contrasty video with deeper shadows. The S was more aggressive with the sharpening, and the Note is cleaner when it comes to noise, but both had similar levels of detail. At 2x magnification, we'd give the win to the Note thanks to its heavier sharpening, but only by a tiny margin. Both have comparable detail though. At 3x zoom, the S21's dedicated camera takes over, and it's really no contest here. The Note doesn't stand a chance. At 5x zoom, the Note makes a predictable comeback with its dedicated camera, but the difference isn't as dramatic as with 3x zoom, and we're more okay with the S phone's performance here than we were with the Note's performance at 3x zoom. 4K at 10x is a win for the S21 and its dedicated module, though the Note isn't doing too bad at this level.
So, in summary, if you shoot a lot of zoomed-in video, the Galaxy S21 Ultra will be a better fit for you. But the Note 20 Ultra doesn't lag too far behind.
Now, during sunset or twilight, video performance doesn't differ much between the two. The Note's footage is cleaner, though detail is about the same. Dynamic range is alright, and colors are colder on the S phone, though both produce realistic colors. What was annoying was that the Note had a tendency to hunt for focus, which can really put a damper on your videography experiments. The S21 didn't have that problem. At night, the Note didn't have issues focusing for some reason, but the S21 Ultra wasn't as rock solid. That said, the newer phone is superior in nighttime conditions as it has cleaner footage overall. If you decide to zoom in when the light gets low, the S21 wins overall, especially since it stays more consistent with focusing. Neither phone had amazing ultrawide video in low light. They don't really produce usable footage, though if we had to choose one, the Note prioritizes brighter exposure over noise reduction, so the clips are a little better.
Stabilization is available in all modes, including 8K, and there are options to turn it off if you're using a gimbal or a tripod.
With 8K, the S21 was more proficient at cancelling out your steps, though both phones had smooth pans with no abrupt transitions at the end. With 4K, whether it be the ultrawide or the main camera, both phones do a good job of stabilizing walking footage. We saw no shake and no jelloing, and pans are smooth too. If you use the super steady mode, you can even record while running. The S21 lets you record in 60 FPS and does a little better here in terms of the cropped in mode, but if you compare 30 FPS footage and the wider magnification, there's a little difference. Where the stabilization of the S21 really comes out on top is when zooming in. It's much steadier than the Note, though we did notice some jelloing at 5x zoom. When it comes to a vlogger's most important backup option, the S21 has a few advantages. The selfie videos it produces are sharper and more detailed, though with more noise. It has more dynamic range and retains detail in the highlights better than the Note. It also produces better videos when it comes to backlit scenes. The Note has more saturated and warmer colors, while the S21 Ultras are more neutral and accurate. For everything that isn't faces, we appreciate the Note's color science better. But considering selfie videos are all about the face, the victory goes to the S21.
Possibly the first thing that's really clear after getting through all this is that both camera setups are amazing, and neither is perfect. Both have a myriad of options, although the Galaxy S21 Ultra offers slightly more. It also performs better when zooming in, aside from those moments when you zoom in at 5x where the Note has a dedicated camera and often trumped it. Neither phone takes amazing photos at 2x zoom, which is disappointing because that's equivalent to a 50mm lens, which is one of the most useful focal lengths around. And you're not gonna have as much use with 10x zoom unless you're a really avid bird photographer. Both were strong in low light, though naturally the Galaxy S21 Ultra did slightly better thanks to the dedicated cameras. Both phones are amazing when it comes to videography, though the Galaxy S21 has a slight edge thanks to improved stabilization, especially when it comes to zooming in. So it's pretty clear that the Galaxy S21 Ultra is better in some areas, but it's not so much better that it's worth upgrading from the Note 20 Ultra if you already have it. Now, if you don't have that particular phone, well, you should know that the Galaxy S21 Ultra has the best camera setup that Samsung has ever produced. Thank you for watching, stay safe, and I'll see you guys next time.